Take a look what happened.
The reason you think you were spared?
I mean, the only thing I can think is that God loves our country and he thinks we're going to bring our country back.
You believe in God?
I do.
You believe God's hand was in this that day?
I believe so, yeah, I do.
And you talk about the country, you believe you have more to do. You weren't done. You were spared for a reason.
Well, God believes that.
God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, fix this country, work all day, fight the Marxists, eat supper, then go to the Oval Office and stay past midnight at a meeting of the heads of state. So God made Trump. I need somebody with arms, strong enough to rustle the deep state, and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild.
I am the chosen one.
I think God calls all of us to fill different roles at different times, and I think that he wanted Donald Trump to become president, and that's why he's there.
Mr. President, I know there are people that say, you know, you said you were the chosen one, and I said, you were.
Was Donald Trump God's chosen candidate?
Yes.
Do you feel like Donald Trump is in some way God's chosen one as a candidate?
I do. I think he's been sent from above.
The Trump movement is a real throwback to the 1500s. The idea that our leaders are sent by God is absolutely ancient. It's the type of things Europeans earnestly believed before the Enlightenment. That is, before we knew about things like gravity, germ theory, or modern medicine. Speaking of which,
the people who got the vaccine had a 23% higher death rate from all causes at the end of that study.
But that could not be the disease itself?
No, well,
because we know that
if it is, then the vaccine doesn't work.
Well, in 2021, in a book called The Measles Book, you wrote that parents had been, quote, misled into believing that measles is a deadly disease and that measles vaccines are necessary, safe, and effective. Reality is measles are in fact deadly and highly contagious, something that you should have learned after your lies contributed to the deaths of 83 people, most of them children, in a measles outbreak in Samoa.
What do you make of lawmakers' calls for you to declare measles a public health emergency?
We are doing probably better than any, or certainly better than any of the other industrial countries in the world in controlling it. We've had about 1,300 measles cases in this country.
But on Sunday, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. posted these photos of he and his grandchildren in Rock Creek. One shows his granddaughter splashing water at him, and another with RFK Jr. fully underwater.
But I never would go into the Rock Creek to swim.
That's because it's been illegal since 1971.
The reason it's illegal is because of the E. coli issues from their combined sewer systems, and that's why they banned swimming in the D.C. area.
COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
I don't know how you would respond to this, man.
not coincidentally, it's also a time before things like religious freedom and public schools were accepted.
But no one will be touching the cross of Christ under the Trump administration, I swear to you.
He's even selling his own version of the Bible.
We must make America pray again.
Trump is playing to a rising white Christian nationalist movement within the Republican Party.
This morning, the White House says it will move forward with its plans to dismantle the Department of Education, following a Supreme Court decision allowing the administration to fire more than 1,000 workers.
And it goes without saying that a God-sent regime that doesn't believe in science or freedom also doesn't care about due process.
Hey, what you guys doing? That's not how you arrest people. If y'all gonna arrest people, y'all gotta arrest people regularly. What y'all doing, bro? Hey, Kevin, no resistes, man, no resistes. What am I doing? Hey, Kevin, hey, y'all get on the ground. All right, bro, you can't be doing that. I'm from here also. Get on the ground. Get up, roll on your side. That's not how you arrest people.
What?
I got rights to talk, bro.
You got no right here.
I do.
Illegal, get up.
I was born and raised here. What about him? I was born and raised here. I have the right.
What's scary about the second Trump term is how absolutely retrograde it really is. It's like a throwback to a time before America even existed. This isn't about making America great again. This is about undoing the entire progress of the Enlightenment. In 1688, the British Parliament carried out a coup where they got rid of King James II in favor of the Dutch ruler, William of Orange. They feared that James would bring back the Catholic religion and rule without their consent. Getting rid of James wasn't a small accomplishment, since people honestly believed that kings were sent to rule by God, something called divine right. Divine right gave Europe's kings a sense of legitimacy. Yet, here Parliament was challenging God's legitimate ruler head-on, and winning. The Parliament wasn't really new to this. 40 years earlier, they executed King Charles for very similar reasons that they ousted James. All things considered, James got off kinda light by being allowed to escape with his life. The overthrow of James in favor of William is called the Glorious Revolution. It was the beginning of the end of divine right and the uncontested power of the king. Enlightenment thinkers drew inspiration from it and spun off new ideas that helped inspire revolutions elsewhere that made the Glorious Revolution look like an ice cream social. The American Revolution was born out of this tumultuous era of history. One thing that both the American and French revolutions could agree on was that the time for absolute kings anointed by God had passed. But now, we have the second MAGA movement, which seeks to undo all of this.
Since his inauguration on January 20th, the president has signed more than 36 executive orders. His administration has also ramped up ICE raids and migrant arrests, fired hundreds of federal employees, overhauled foreign aid, and implemented hefty tariffs on the United States' three largest trading partners, Mexico, Canada, and China. There's a conservative constitutional theory known as the unitary executive. What is it? And how might the Trump administration be utilizing it?
Well, it's the idea that the president is ultimately the one who has complete authority over the executive branch. And the most controversial part of this theory is the idea that the president has unfettered discretion to remove people who work for the executive branch.
The sad thing is, we were warned about all of this, not just by modern political pundits, but philosophers that lived hundreds of years ago. The question is, how much further behind can we fall? The answer gets scarier every day. The Englishman John Locke delivered the ultimate diss track against deductive reasoning in his epic 1689 tract, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. Locke claimed that a person is born as a blank slate, what he called a tabula rasa in Latin. They only learn about the world through experience. Once you see rain or a shoe or a kitty cat, can't you say for sure that you know they exist? It turns out you don't need an entire cogito ergo sum to know the world. You could write on your tabula rasa through experiencing the world firsthand. Locke's work was the death blow to Descartes and deductive reasoning, also known as rationalism. It was a strong co-signing of the inductive reasoning championed by Bacon, Newton, and Spinoza, what we will call empiricism from here on out. Empiricism just means that knowledge comes from observation. Sometimes you'll hear scientists talk about empirical evidence. It just means evidence we could verify through experience. As an empiricist, it's perhaps ironic that Locke started with the state of nature when discussing government. The state of nature was supposedly the period in history before government existed, a period that neither Locke nor anyone else could empirically study. A previous English thinker, Thomas Hobbes, believed life in the state of nature sucked. In his words, it was a war of all against all. That's why Hobbes believed people needed a strong king to keep violent humans in line. Locke didn't believe that people were as violent as Hobbes made them seem. They have a natural desire for peace, order, and property. In the state of nature, if someone tries to disturb these things, the only recourse we have is revenge. You can kind of see this in action today in international relations. If one country attacks another, the only recourse the victim country has is to attack back.
Overnight, in the capital of Ukraine, the sound of missile strikes and air sirens. Explosions rocking several cities, including the capital of Kyiv.
After all, there's no policeman or court they can go to for justice. International relations today is kind of like a state of nature. Therefore, according to Locke in his book 2 Treatises on Government, people created governments a long time ago to protect their lives and property. They would give up their right to seek revenge to a government who would seek revenge for them in the name of justice and law. This had some major implications. First, that the purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property, what Locke claimed were natural rights. Second, governments were created a long time ago by agreements between groups of people. This means kings weren't sent to us by God. It is us who agrees to allow the king to rule. All governments are formed and maintained by what was called a social contract, meaning we all agree to live in a society under a specific government. We give power to the government. But wait a minute, you might be thinking, I didn't agree to nothing. I don't like this fascist orange clown in office now, and I didn't like the old neoliberal clown who was in office before him. I didn't agree to any of this. This did pose a problem for Locke because it's true that we didn't explicitly consent to the government we have now. His response would be, you pay taxes, you say the Pledge of Allegiance and sing the national anthem, and you live here. You can always leave if you don't consent to this government. It's kind of a weak argument on his part, but it highlights the point that he believes every government is based on an agreement between the people who live under it. What's important is that Locke's idea of a social contract is a complete rejection of the divine right of kings. The power lays with us, not with God. But doesn't that imply that we could take that power away from the government? If it's our consent that gives the government power, then our lack of consent can confiscate that power. Sure enough, according to Locke, if enough people believe that the government isn't protecting natural rights, then the people have the ability to get rid of the government and replace it with one that does protect natural rights. In other words, humans have a right to start revolutions. It's common to assume that Locke wrote his 2 treatises on government as a way to justify England's glorious revolution. After all, wasn't Parliament just taking away their consent to have James as their king? But Locke most likely wrote most of that book before the Glorious Revolution even happened. He had much more of an influence on the American and French revolutions that came in the next century. And he wasn't a champion of democracy either. Most Enlightenment thinkers weren't. For Locke, the type of government people choose is kind of irrelevant, as long as it protects natural rights. He did believe in a measure of tolerance. As an Englishman and a Protestant, Locke didn't believe that Catholics or Jews should be discriminated against. In fact, he didn't believe government should interfere with religion at all. It would be nice if everyone in a society could agree on a religion, and presumably, it should be Locke's Protestant religion, but if not, oh well. For Locke, discriminating against religious groups would just make enemies out of those groups and make it tougher for the government to do its job. This is why Locke is also considered a founding father of religious freedom and the separation of church and state. It's important to note, though, that Locke didn't consider freedom of religion a right per se. He just believed giving people religious freedom was a good thing because it helped society function better. Even though Locke is mostly considered a pre-Enlightenment thinker, his concern for the proper foundation and function of government shows a very Enlightenment-like concern for discovering ways for people to live their best lives here on Earth. It wasn't about preparing for the afterlife or trying to get everyone to accept a certain religion. It was about how we should organize ourselves into the best type of society using a bit of empirical evidence and maybe a bit of conjecture about what the state of nature was like. It was practical, and it was secular. Another important Enlightenment word. Secular means that it was concerned with the world around us. For Descartes, secular was, at best, half of the world. The other half was the mind, or the eternal part we never see. While we can debate as to how much Bacon, Newton, Spinoza, and Locke believed in a spiritual life, and they probably did believe in it to varying degrees, the key is that they weren't too concerned with it. It wasn't their focus. For Locke especially, religion was a private matter. Let the priests worry about souls, let the philosophers worry about the secular. Shortly after Locke's death, the Frenchman Montesquieu visited England. In his words, there was no religion there, which meant religion was more or less a private matter, as Locke said it should be. Religion wasn't even a proper topic for discussion like it was in his homeland of France, which was predominantly Catholic. It's safe to say that Montesquieu was impressed with British society. He saw Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and even Muslims conducting business together. This showed him the value of religious tolerance. Tolerance enabled people to conduct commerce together. In the 1700s, commerce not only meant doing business, it meant interacting in a friendly way. Tolerance promoted harmony, and harmony helped society function well. He also liked the fact that the British government didn't torture accused criminals. Montesquieu was a judge back in France who had undoubtedly called for the torture of many defendants. He realized that torture didn't work. Torture victims rarely confessed their crimes or ended up confessing crimes they didn't commit in order to get the torture to stop. Despite knowing this simple truth back in the early 1700s, the United States continues to use torture today here and overseas. Do we do this to seek justice, or is this just a symptom of a needlessly cruel society? Montesquieu saw that England was clearly not a cruel society. He chalked this up to England's relatively cool climate. Montesquieu believed that climate shaped the characteristics of every country. Countries in cold climates were hard-working and practical. Countries in warmer climates were lazy and hedonistic. This is why he believed northern countries were always conquering southern countries. Today we consider this idea ridiculous, especially because Montesquieu was often wrong about the climates of the countries he wrote about. However, it did lead him to a correct conclusion that social scientists still use today. Each country is different. They have different values and priorities. In Montesquieu's words, each country has a general spirit. The general spirit of a country helps explain its history and institutions. It's a recipe to appreciate cultural differences, helping us be less judgmental of other cultures. This idea of general spirit helped Montesquieu write his masterpiece, The Spirit of the Laws, in 1748. The Spirit of the Laws compared different governments from different civilizations in order to understand the proper role of government. This way, he could boil the role of government down to its essential parts. First and foremost, the form of government any country uses is determined by its general spirit. Montesquieu saw three types of governments countries could choose: republic, monarchy, or despotism. Despotism was clearly the worst form of government. A despotism is what we might call a dictatorship, a government where one person makes and changes the laws as they see fit. Larger countries that run on fear are usually despotisms. He used the Ottoman Empire or Spain after Columbus as examples of despotism. These countries fail because they can't conduct commerce. People are afraid to freely associate with each other since they can never know who might rat them out to the ruler. They're also discouraged from doing business and making money, since anything they earn could be taken by the king at any moment. You don't want to end up under a despotism. Republics and monarchies were both good for different reasons. A republic is when people make the laws, either through voting on them, like a direct democracy such as ancient Athens, or by voting for representatives to make laws for them, an indirect democracy, like the American colony of Pennsylvania. Unlike despotisms, republics can safely do commerce since they wouldn't make laws to take their own property away. The problem is that republics really only work in smaller countries where it's easier to assemble people to vote. Also, a small number of people could make lots of money through commerce, which would allow them to buy influence over the government. This turns republics into despotisms. The only way to prevent this is by limiting both the size of the country and the amount of money people could make by levying high taxes on the wealthy. This is why people think the United States is well on the road to despotism. We have the third highest population on Earth, combined with the worst inequality in the Western world. Billionaires like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Donald Trump nakedly exercise power over the government while a vocal minority cheers them on. It's not just the United States either. Russia has already become a despotism, as has Hungary. You could argue the same thing for Israel. Countries like South Korea and Brazil have moved in the same direction, and things are not looking good for even the strongest republics like the UK and Germany. There's clearly a worldwide lurch towards despotism, which is giving 1930s, and we all know what happened at the end of the 1930s. This is why Montesquieu believed a monarchy was probably the best form of government. Under a monarchy, people are motivated to serve the country well to get on the king's good side. There's a sense of national honor. They also do commerce, and unlike republics, it's okay if a small number of people gain wealth through commerce in a monarchy. After all, you can't buy a king the way you could buy influence in a republic. They'll just buy rich people things like private jets or heated toilet seats or eggs. This keeps money flowing so that us 99%ers also get a cut of it. Of course, monarchies can become despotisms if the king gets too much power or if the rich people combine to challenge the king. Montesquieu believed England and France found solutions to this by having kings share power with nobles. You could become a noble by serving the king with honor, like through military service or being a judge like Montesquieu. Nobles can keep in touch with the people and advise the king on the best ways to make and execute laws for his people. In England, the king relied on Parliament for this purpose, and in France, the Parlement, for which Montesquieu served. A good monarchy was separated into different branches so that each branch served a different purpose. Montesquieu recognized three distinct functions of government. 1. Making laws, what he called legislative power. 2. Enforcing laws, what he called executive power. And 3. Determining whether or not the law is being properly followed, what he called judicial power. England and France found ways to separate these functions into different branches, although he thought French kings and English nobles probably had too much power in their respective systems. In short, the best way to prevent despotism is to have a separation of powers into legislative, executive, and judicial. That way, no single branch of government could overpower the other. Kings, nobles, and judges all balance each other out. It's no surprise that the writers of America's Constitution, especially James Madison, were very familiar with Montesquieu's idea of separation of powers. It's the hallmark of American government. We have a Congress to make laws, a president to enforce laws, and a court system to ensure laws are being followed. We have a separation of powers between branches, where each branch balances out the others, what we call checks and balances. Therefore, it's safe to say that John Locke's idea of government as a social contract helped inspire the Americans to fight for independence, and Montesquieu's idea of separation of powers helped inspire the government America would create after winning independence. While there is no denying there were other factors at play, there is also no denying that America's founding fathers were deeply entrenched in Enlightenment ideas. These ideas crossed oceans and borders and time periods. They strike nerves across all sectors of humanity. Revolutions in the United States, France, Poland, South America, and Haiti drew direct inspiration from the Enlightenment. Later movements like socialism, communism, and anarchy also bear the fingerprints of Enlightenment thought, although with more modern embellishments. What we're living through with MAGA is another revolution of sorts, or probably a counter-revolution. It's an attempt by elites to put the genie of the Enlightenment back in the bottle. We had our few hundred years of fun getting rid of kings and protecting natural rights. It was good while it lasted. And, of course, not everyone's natural rights were always protected. Native Americans, black slaves, and the global South were killed and exploited for the comfort of rich white men. It took years of struggle to protect the natural rights of even poor white men. It took a civil war, 2 world wars, and a civil rights movement to begin to protect the natural rights of people of color and women. And just at the moment where it seemed like the promises of the Enlightenment were being extended to people of color and women, what happened? We ended up with MAGA, a movement that looks back on 500 years of hope and says, psych, we're going to go in a different direction. All that social contract, separation of powers, religious freedom, open society stuff, we don't need that anymore. In a world of AI, social media, and cloud computing, things like natural rights might seem quaint. But for me, it gets my spidey senses up to see a movement full of people so full-throatedly rejecting basic Enlightenment ideals. The ideals that our modern civilization was founded upon. We didn't always live up to these ideals, but they were always there to point us in the right direction. Great people throughout history came along from time to time to point us in that direction, to remind us to live up to the ideals we set out for ourselves. My fear is not that we're up against a movement who rejects these ideals. My fear is that we're up against a movement that rejects the entire idea of civilization. Can the Enlightenment point us in the right direction again? Or has that ship already sailed?